Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is David Bianco. Today on our audio excursion, we're going to be going back to 1975. The self-titled Fleetwood Mac album got released, which had some great hits on it like Over My Head and Rhiannon. And we're going to be comparing the 1979 release by Mobile Fidelity, a half-speed master, to the recently released 33 1/3 RPM cut by Chris Bellman release. That's coming up next at our Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. So the 1975 release of the album Fleetwood Mac, just a self-titled album after all this time, really was a rebirth of the band in a way. Bob Welch had left the band, and now they were going into a little bit of a different genre, a little more top 40-ish type genre. And a producer, Keith Olson, on this album definitely had great chops in the matter of bringing hits to bands. And so this album had, in fact, several 45 RPM or top 10 type hits. They had the beautiful Rhiannon. They had Over My Head. It had Say You Love Me. It had the classic Landslide on it. So this album really was formational for the new Fleetwood Mac, or the Fleetwood Mac that we really got to know as a hit maker in the 70s and the 80s. And so the simplicity of the album and the sound was just so fabulous and really grabbed the attention of a lot of people who honestly didn't know who Fleetwood Mac was at the time. And this album came out, and in 1975, it was a big hit for Fleetwood Mac. The album shot up to number one and sold over 7 million copies, and it really was something that Fleetwood Mac had just come out of a very tumultuous time with changes in the band, the rights to the name Fleetwood Mac being at question in 1974. And so when Keith Olson was assigned this project, one of the things he did was he had heard Buckingham Nicks and contacted Lindsay Buckingham about potentially joining the band. Well, Lindsay was open to that with one little caveat, and that is that he had to bring his girlfriend, Stevie Nicks, as well. Well, as we all know, that did happen, and let's face it, the sound of Fleetwood Mac that we know now today really was born by that activity of Keith Olson reaching out. So the new Fleetwood Mac was really a new creation, and in such, you can tell the difference in the music. And it was, in fact, something that became very, very popular with the follow-on album Rumors, as we all know, one of the classic albums that's out there. So what about these two recordings? Well, personally, I had bought the original OG when it came out because of the singles and the power of them. I didn't find the OG to be an overpoweringly great recording, personally, and when the Mobile Fidelity version of the album came out in 1979, one of its earlier releases from the Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab birthing in the late 70s, it really sounded fabulous. Virgin vinyl, quiet as could be, very well-defined musicality in the tracks, the ability to hear instrumentation with great nuance compared to the original. So to me, it was really a breath of fresh air. Well, fast forward to now. Chris Bellman has done several of these releases for this album and been involved with the remastering and the cutting on this. And in fact, 2022 is the 33 RPM release. Back in 2012, there was a Record Store Day 45 RPM release, which unfortunately I don't have to compare to. So all I can say is I would imagine that being 45 RPM, it has definitely the potential to sound better, potentially. But of course, 10 years later, some of the equipment and the techniques and the nuances today may be a little better as well. So possibly it's much, much closer. So the 33 RPM really has a great sound to it for $25. It blows the OG away. So in that regard, it's a no-brainer. It's very well done and it sounds great until you put on the mobile fidelity. Now, the mobile fidelity, it has songs where you really can hear certain instrumentation very distinctly, especially percussive instruments, and they really sound distinct. You hear them on the Chris Bellman, and they're there, but they're muddled a bit in the rest of the track. And on the mobile fidelity, they stand out, and the imaging is more distinct in the mobile fidelity to my ears. And so therefore, for me, as I listen to these songs that I've listened to for years, now I've listened to it on the mobile fidelity because that basically was my go-to version. Those are things that I'm used to hearing that way. And so when I put on the Chris Bellman cut, I certainly recognized the clarity of it and the way the vocals had a great pushed forward kind of sound to them. And I really did hear the instrumentation, but it wasn't quite as distinctly evident in the sound stage and in the imaging of the actual audio. And because of that, I still will go back to the mobile fidelity for the pure enjoyment. Now, to throw on the Chris Bellman for $24, $25, hey, it's a perfectly great decision. The mobile fidelities used start at about $70 and upwards. So is it 3 times better? Well, if you really like this album and you really want to get into that nuance, then maybe so. And again, my mobile fidelity was one that I got when it came out in 1979. So for me, having it has been kind of a baseline to me. But the Chris Bellman is certainly enjoyable, and it certainly sounds excellent. Relatively quiet vinyl, and really an excellent job. For $25 in today's vinyl world, and that's US dollars, by the way, you can't go wrong. And that's my message in this shootout. The Chris Bellman is excellent. It does a great job. If you really like this album a lot and want to hear even more pulled out of it, then I think the mobile fidelity has merit. It does sound, in the end, the most pleasing to my ears. But that doesn't mean that the Chris Bellman 33 1/3 that came out here in 2022 is displeasing. It is pleasing as well, just not quite as much. And so that's the distinction. Now, there's people out there, this whole issue with the smiley EQ curve that people say was put on some mobile fidelity records, especially in the earlier years. Well, I'm here to tell you that I'm really not one to say that there is objective information to prove that based on Stan Ricker, who was in fact the person who did the half-speed mastering on these early records from MFSL, did that to the extent that people say was done. So I don't necessarily hear that across the board. I think that's a generalization against the mobile fidelity records. And myself, I don't quite subscribe to it across the board. I certainly don't feel like that is, in fact, what happened with this album, with Mobile Fidelity's Fleetwood Mac. Not at all. I do feel there is some distinction that came out in the outcome, whether it be because it was half-speed mastered or the techniques that Stan Ricker used, but certainly it draws out some of the voice distinctions and the stereo imaging, as well as the depth and specific percussive feedback that you get from the instruments when they are struck, which you definitely lose a bit in the Bellman release, and you lose quite significantly in the OG, at least the OG that I purchased back in the day. So, for me, the Bellman cut definitely is a great value, and you can't go wrong. But for me, if I'm going to say which one sounds the best at the end of the day, for me, I'm going to put on the Mobile Fidelity release from 1979. So that's my take on this classic game-changing Fleetwood Mac album. If you're not a subscriber, please consider doing so by clicking on the bell below, and the top black bell gives you notification alerts. A thumbs up is always appreciated for the video, and comments are always welcome. What are your thoughts on this album? Do you have different pressings, and what do you think of them? I'd love to hear your input. So for now, thank you for watching, and join me next time as we take another Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Take care, everybody.